thing about Hawaii is there's always a breeze, and they call it there. They have a special name for it. I mean, it's not a common. It's just not just for Hawaii, but we call it trade winds. Okay. Yeah. And so you know what trade is? Trade is like Maui, right? But it's called trade winds, I think, because the wind would blow when they use sailing ships 150 years ago or longer, they would rely on these winds to take them across the ocean. So they have, you have certain air currents that go through across the ocean. Of course, sailors know which way the wind is going at which time of the year. And so Hawaii always has these trade winds that bring this, it's just like today, it brings this nice breeze. So that it doesn't feel so hot all the time. And of course, Hawaii's not a super hot place. Taiwan is hotter than Hawaii. And even Pennsylvania, Bingzhou is hotter than Hawaii. But I think it's largely because of this. Yeah. So why don't we say together, trade winds. Trade winds. Yeah. So, so I thought today we would start with an article. Does anyone know tomorrow, August 15th, what's important about that day? Not Donald Trump. I'll give you a clue. It's something that happened 80 years ago. Yeah, it was the end of the World War II, I believe. It was yeah. So, or the Japanese agreed to surrender. So basically, it's the 80th anniversary. I don't know about you, but I still remember when it was like the 50th anniversary, and then the 60th anniversary, and the 70th anniversary. So now it's the 80th anniversary. So time moves on. But before I get to this article, I was just reading. I watched a short documentary, like we say, 纪录片, on YouTube yesterday, and it was quite fascinating because it talked about how at the end of World War II, there was a few, not many, but a few Japanese soldiers who kept fighting, right? They didn't surrender. In fact, they went up into the mountains and they just kept fighting for many, many, many years afterwards. And of course, there was one soldier that was quite famous because he stayed in the Philippines until 1974, until he finally surrendered. But what this documentary points out, and I read this in a book too recently, is actually the last Japanese soldier that they know about to surrender was not Japanese. He was actually from Taiwan, and he was Amezu, and he was in Indonesia, an island called Morotai, and he also surrendered, or he was captured by the Indonesian army in 1970, also late 1974. I think it was December 1974. Maybe some of you remember that because he came back to Taiwan, and of course at that time, Taiwan was definitely under more of the Kuomintang administration. So some people didn't like the fact that he had been fighting for the Japanese for that long. But I read that the Chilupian said that the Japanese government gave him the money that they owed him for his service. They gave him a reward, and he got a lot of gifts from Japanese, just normal people for his service. But I thought that was very fascinating, very interesting that the last guy that they found was actually from Taiwan, and he was a Yuanzhuming. He was an indigenous person. Okay, that's his Chinese name. Well, they had his Japanese name, and then they gave his Yuanzhuming name. So, yeah, it was kind of interesting. But it's funny because this documentary said that there's probably other guys that were there, that were in the mountains of other places even longer. They said that in, I think it was the Philippines, they found some evidence that there may be some guys there up till like even the 1980s that were still in the mountains, that had never surrendered. So that's quite amazing that these guys just continued. Either they didn't believe the war was over, or they wanted to keep fighting. They just thought they should. Well, they said this guy, he's Yuanzhuming, right? They said he built a house, he planted a garden. So I think he knew what he could do. He was pretty good at taking care of himself. He wasn't married. And when he came back to Taiwan, it sounds like he only lived about 5 more years until 1979, and then he passed away. So yeah, he didn't live too much longer. But anyhow, I saw this article, and of course you probably have heard about this before, but it's talking about POWs camps or POWs in Taiwan. Now, does everybody know what POW stands for? Yeah, so this is a very common term. You know, sometimes we have these abbreviations. So it means prisoner of war, okay? So if you're a soldier, you're fighting in the army, and then you surrender or you are captured, then you become a POW or prisoner of war. And then, of course, during World War II and most other wars, there's a lot of POWs. And sometimes they're treated well and sometimes they're treated terribly. Of course, in this case, they were not treated very well, you know, when they were captured by the Japanese. So why don't we say it together? Prisoner of war. Prisoner of war. Yeah, so this term POW is very common. You hear this a lot. You know, there are certain words, abbreviations that you'll hear quite a bit. Okay, so it says here, nobody else knew. POWs held in Taiwan. Unspoken tragedies. Many survivors refused to talk about their experiences while people were unaware of the horrors in Taiwan, an amateur historian said. Okay, so unspoken, of course, I think you know what that means. It's not spoken, right? You know, often we say, the two of us have an unspoken agreement, right? Sometimes you have an agreement with somebody, but you don't really say it, you don't talk about it. You say, we have an unspoken agreement to do this or not do that. So there's a lot of things. Sometimes we say, there's a lot of things I want to say, but they have been left unspoken. So that word is quite common. Why don't we say together, unspoken? Unspoken. And I think you all know what a tragedy is, right? A tragedy is like a disaster, you know, what is it, EY or something like that. It's something that very bad. Why don't we say it together, tragedy? Tragedy. Okay, so these are, and it says survivors here, we're talking about POWs. They refuse to talk about their experiences while people were unaware or not aware of the horrors in Taiwan. Of course, horror is something terrible, something that's very bad, okay? Of course, we have like horror movies and things like that, so it can be used as a 形容词. But if something is horror, or we say, of course, from that word, we have the word horrible, right? If something is very bad, you say, well, that's really horrible. Something that's just really terrible, okay? So why don't we say that together? Horrible. Horrible. Horror. Horror. Okay, now it says all of this is according to an amateur historian. Now, historian, of course, is somebody who studies history, right? There's many historians. And of course, some historians are professional, right? They study that, maybe they have their 博士 or something like that, they're a professor. But what does amateur mean? Yeah, it basically means non-professional. So, novice means beginner. So this would not be a novice. This guy actually, he knows a lot about this. So amateur, you know, there's many people, sometimes people say, oh, he is an amateur photographer, right? He likes to take pictures, but he's not a professional. He doesn't do this for work. He doesn't do this to make money. So we say he is an amateur. Now, sometimes when we say somebody is an amateur, it's kind of a negative thing. It means like if someone's trying to do something and they're not doing a very good job, and we say, oh, he's an amateur. He doesn't know what he's doing. Or we could say that job is he did a very amateurish with the I. We add an ISH, amateurish job. It means it's not done very professionally. Okay, but here, of course, amateur is fine. I mean, there's many things we do. I think many of us are amateur. We do things, but we're not professionals. Like, I enjoy photography, but I'm not a professional. Well, I actually am a professional, I guess. I take pictures for my magazine, but I'm not a real professional photographer. Okay, so when we say this word here, the T has a CH sound, like a ch sound. So let's say together, amateur. Amateur. Okay, and he just used a word that's different, but I'll write it down. The word novice means beginner. Okay, so if you're just starting to do something, you don't really know how to do it yet, we can say he is a novice, okay? He's new at it. It's brand new. It's something he's never done. So if you could say, if someone's a novice photographer, it means they're just starting to learn how to take pictures, okay? Or a novice cook, chef, someone who wants to cook food, okay? So we could say he is just a novice, okay? We can use that word novice as a 形容词 or as a 名词, okay? So why don't we say together novice? Novice. Okay, but this guy's not a novice. He actually, I've heard his name before, so yeah. So anyhow, let's go on and read the article and see what it says. Okay, it says, in a small urban park in northern Taiwan, more than 4,000 names are etched into a granite wall, most of them British and U.S. servicemen held by the Japanese during World War II. Okay, so let's look at these words. First of all, I think you know, what does urban mean? City, yeah. So, we have many urban, well, this is an urban area. Of course, in Taichung, we live in an urban environment or urban, setting. Okay. Now, what would be the opposite of urban? If you were living in the country, 乡下, rural, yeah. So we could say a rural area, and then we have urban, and then there's one other place, kind of in between, we say suburban, yeah. I know we've talked about this before. Yeah. Suburban. Yeah, sorry, I'm spelling this right. Missing something here. Suburban. Yeah, that comes from the word suburb, okay? What's suburb, do you know? Yeah, it's that area that's on the edge of the city. It's not in the country, but it's not in the downtown city. It's kind of on the side. Now, in Taiwan, I don't know. I think Taiwan has Taichung has some suburbs. Maybe we could say, somewhere like Houli or maybe Fengyuan. I don't know. But in America, the suburbs are very, very clear. When you're in a suburb, you know you're in a suburb. It just feels different. It's not in this. It's part of the city, but it's not in the country. So anyhow, we call that the suburbs with an S. Okay. So why don't we say these words together? Urban. Urban. Rural. Rural. Suburban. Suburban. Right. So yeah, we have these three kind of different areas. So here it says, in a small urban park in northern Taiwan, more than 4,000 names are etched in a granite wall. So first of all, this wall is like a 墙壁. And what's granite?
It's a very hard stone.
Yeah, it's a kind of stone,石头. How do you say this in Chinese? Yeah. It's very popular for statues and sculptures and because it's very hard. So why don't we say together, granite. Granite. Okay.
Huangshan in China, it's a whole mass of
Granite? Okay. Huangshan. Oh, okay. So it's probably very, very hard. Okay. No, it's usually said granite. Yeah. Yeah, I don't hear people saying granite. It's granite. Why don't we say it one more time? Granite. Okay. Now it says 4,000 names are etched. What's another word for etch? Carved. Yeah. So we could say they are carved. But etch usually, often when you say the word etch, it has it's carving, but it's finer. It's smaller, right? Like a name. When we say carving, it could be something very big or, in detail. Like sometimes if you're doing a very fine picture or you're carving somebody's name, we might say it's etched, okay? So anyhow, why don't we say together, etched? Etched. It's interesting, this word sometimes is used in other ways. For example, if you see something or you experience something and it leaves a big impression on you, you could say that experience has been etched into my memory. Okay, my memory, right? It's in my heart or etched into my heart means it's something I will not forget. It's like it's carved there. Okay? What? How do you spell that? Oh, engraved. Yeah, actually that's a good word. The word engrave is actually very similar. You could say it's engraved in my heart. You could say that. So engrave or an engraving, engraving is a 名词. But to engrave is very similar to the word etch, right? If you carve something like, for example, like a monument or, something where you have many names, you could say there are names engraved onto the stone or onto the monument, okay? Why don't we say that word together as well? Engrave. Engrave. And if it's a 名词, we say engraving. Engraving. We could also say this one. We could say etching. Etching. Just like we say carving, right? It's a 名词, right? So it says here 4,000 names are etched into a granite wall, most of them British and U.S. servicemen. Now, when we say servicemen, what does that mean? Like soldiers. Now, of course, it could be soldiers or sailors or, Marines, 海军陆战队, or airmen. It could be anyone who serves in the military. Okay. Now, I noticed that today, of course, in 美国, or especially America, we don't use the word service. I mean, of course, these were men, 4,000 men. But today, when we just talk about people in general, we say service members. Like member, like members, because it could be men or women, right? So, yeah, but GI is more of a casual term. It's a more of a general term, and it's used more casually. Yeah, so the word GI is a kind of a word that goes back to World War II. Yeah, and it's GI, and it just means a service member. But I don't hear this word used too much today. I mean, when we use it for World War II or something like that, you hear people talking about GIs. But but servicemen, of course, in this case, this is accurate because they're all men. But today, if we were just talking about U.S. We would say U.S. service members, okay, not servicemen. Okay, so why don't we say together, servicemen. Servicemen. And then the other word, service members. Service members. Right. So, it's very interesting. And this word tends to this expression gets used more, I think, in America, not so much in other places. But if you ask somebody, were you in the service? Okay. Or did you serve? It means that were you in the military? Okay. Now, in America, if you say that, people understand. But if you went to Ojo or somebody else, they might not understand what you mean. But I know in the U.S., it's very common to say, oh, were you in the service or did you serve? Okay. And, of course, in America, it's very, very popular today. If you meet somebody who is either serving right now or they served before, people often will automatically say, thank you for your service. This is a very, very common expression. I hear this all the time in America. I think it's a good thing, although sometimes I feel like it gets a little bit overused. Like just people automatically say it, and maybe they're not really thinking about what it means. But yeah, Americans like to say that. If they meet a veteran, someone who served before, or they meet someone who's serving now, they say, oh, thank you for your service. Because, and I think it's good because it's a way of showing respect for people who are in the military, okay? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Actually, it was the opposite. The Americans called the Vietnamese soldiers Charlie. Yeah. So I don't know. During wartime, soldiers often have nicknames for the enemy, right? Sometimes those nicknames are not very nice, and sometimes they're just strange, like unusual names. But yeah, during the Vietnam War, American soldiers would call the 北越 soldiers, or basically the communist soldiers, they would just call them Charlie. Charlie. Yeah. So they would often use this word Charlie to describe the enemy. Okay. And that's actually a very interesting question because I don't honestly know how they started using that name. Now, Charlie is probably a better name. I mean, I've heard a lot of other names that I won't repeat that were used for enemy soldiers during World War II or Vietnam War or the Korean War. You know, often I think during wartime you kind of, we say, dehumanize the enemy. You want to make the enemy seem like less than human. So you come up with a name for them that makes them less than human. But yeah, Charlie was a very common name for, yeah, I don't know why. That's something I will go home and I will Google that. Because I'm very, what? No, I honestly cannot think of a reason why the enemy would be called Charlie. I really don't know why. You know, obviously it's a very Western name. It has nothing to do with Vietnam. Oh, I know these servicemen were captured all over the Pacific. Some were captured in the Philippines. Some were captured in Singapore. Malaysia, brought to Taiwan, yeah. So I just a small note on this. You know, I grew up in Hualien, and in Hualien there's a road, and I forget the name of the road, but there's a road that goes from downtown, you know, Shizhongxing, up the hill, up Xiameilun to the top. And I remember my father telling me that road was built by POWs. The Japanese had POWs build that road, and including one very famous general. And he was the commanding general of the American forces when they surrendered to the Japanese in the Philippines. His name was Jonathan Wainwright. So I think you know MacArthur, General MacArthur, right? When he left the Philippines to go to Australia, the U.S. government ordered him to leave. And he left the U.S. military under the command of a general named Jonathan Wainwright. And Jonathan Wainwright was captured by the Japanese when the U.S. surrendered in the Philippines, and he helped build that road in Hualien because he was a POW at that time. So anyhow, kind of an interesting history. But yeah, the Death March. Yeah. I think he was part of that. Yeah. Yeah, he survived. He actually survived, and at the end of the war, MacArthur asked him. He said, "What do you want to do? You know, any command that any unit or group you want, I will give it to you. You know, I will allow you." And so he asked to command a certain division or army. So anyhow, that MacArthur he continued to serve after World War II. MacArthur gave him the opportunity or the honor of continuing because he had spent these years in Taiwan and other places. So yeah. Anyhow, let's read this article, read this paragraph. It says, in a small urban park in northern Taiwan, more than 4,000 names are etched into a granite wall. Let's say it again, granite wall. Most of them British and U.S. servicemen held by the Japanese during World War II. Okay, next paragraph. It says, the somber memorial sits on the site of the Kinkaseki, that's the name. Jingguashan, yeah. So a brutal prisoner of war camp near Taipei, and one of more than a dozen run by Japan in the country it ruled from 1895 until its defeat in 1945. So what's this word here, somber, mean? It means more serious or sad, okay? Yeah, so if you say somebody's face looks very somber, you know, or you say he has a somber expression on his face, it usually means his face looks very serious or maybe a little bit sad, right? Like something not good has happened, right? Or you can say this is a very somber moment, right? You know, sometimes during a funeral when somebody dies, everyone's gathered and to remember that person, and the funeral has a very somber atmosphere or feeling to it, right? So it means very serious, very sad. But yeah, anyhow, I think you understand that. Let's say together, somber. Somber. And of course, you know what a memorial is, right? A memorial is something we build. Often it's a monument to remember something, right? We have the word remember and then memorial. So it's something that helps us to remember. Now, of course, memorial can also be a 形容词. We can say a memorial service, a memorial. We're going to have a memorial event, right? It's something to remember people by. So let's say it together, memorial. Memorial. Okay, so often instead of saying a funeral, right, when somebody dies, sometimes we say a memorial event or memorial service or time of memorial. It's basically a time to remember. Okay, so this somber, this serious memorial sits on the site, the location of, yes, it's Jingguashan, Jingguashi, right?
Have you been there?
I have been by it. I haven't stopped, but I should go.
It's a very nice hiking trail.
Yeah, and I know it's on the side of the mountain, kind of overlooking the ocean. So, yeah. So, I guess the Japanese call it kinkaseki. Okay. A brutal. Now, I think you know the word brutal, right? Brutal means very cruel or harsh, right? So, harsh or cruel, we can describe people as being brutal or a brutal action or very harsh or cruel. Okay? So, why don't we say that word together? Brutal. Brutal. Harsh. Harsh. Cruel. Cruel. Okay, so a brutal prisoner of war camp near Taipei, and it was more than a dozen. There were over 12 of these camps run by Japan in Taiwan. So anyhow. Okay, so let's read this together. The somber memorial. One more time. Somber memorial. Sits on the site of Kinkaseki, a brutal prisoner of war camp near Taipei, and one of more than a dozen run by Japan in the country it ruled from 1895 until its defeat in 1945. Okay. It says here, for decades, little was known of the POW camps, said Michael Hurst, a Canadian amateur military historian in Taipei who has spent years researching them. Okay, so here we have that word amateur. And so we can say little was known. So if we want to turn that into a 形容词, we can call it a little known history, or this was little known. Okay, we take little and we add a hyphen, little known. Okay, but anyhow, little was known of the POW camps. Okay. Okay. Oh, really? Yeah, I've heard this guy's name for many, many years because almost every year he organizes a memorial event to remember these soldiers. And I know that they've invited some of the actual soldiers back to Taiwan to join these events. Of course, these guys, there's fewer and fewer of these guys because many of them have passed away or they're getting very, very old. But I know that over the years, he's invited these guys to come back to Taiwan. So let's read this. It says, for decades, little was known of the POW camps, said Michael Hurst, a Canadian amateur military historian in Taipei who has spent years researching them. Okay. So that was a photo caption. So it says here, many survivors had refused to talk about their experiences, while POWs held elsewhere in Asia had been unaware of the horrors in Taiwan, and museums and academics had glossed over them Hearst said. Okay, so of course many of the men, like he said, the survivors, they didn't want to talk about their past. And then there's, of course, POW camps in other places in Asia. They had been unaware or not aware of the horrors in Taiwan. And it says, in museums and academics. What is an academic? What's another word for this? Yeah, but there's a very common word. We simply say a scholar. Yeah. So, someone who studies. Yeah. So why don't we say it together? Academic. Academic. And then that word, scholar. Scholar. Now, academic can also be used as a 形容词, right? You can say, in school, what academic subjects do you enjoy? You might say, I like biology and history or English or whatever. Okay, so we say academic. Yeah. Okay, so here it says museums and academics had glossed over them. This is an interesting word. And you say something has been glossed over. We always use these words together. What does that mean if you gloss something over? Yeah, basically means you ignore it. You don't pay attention to it, okay? So let's say somebody has done something very bad. Maybe someone committed a crime, and you can say, well, the authorities glossed over his crimes, right? For example, maybe somebody is, you have somebody who's very famous, and someone wants to bring up or mention his previous, something he did that was wrong or bad, and they say, oh, no, don't worry about it. We're just going to gloss over that. It means we're going to ignore it. We're not going to pay attention to it. So often it's the idea that you're kind of hiding something or you're ignoring something. You're not focusing on it when you should, okay? So why don't we say together, to gloss over. To gloss over. Okay, so these POWs that were held in Taiwan, their history was kind of glossed over. Museums and scholars, academics didn't really focus on that. They didn't pay attention to that, okay? So let's read this together. Many survivors had refused to talk about their experiences, while POWs held elsewhere in Asia had been unaware of the horrors in Taiwan. And museums and academics had glossed over them. Hearst said. Okay. I think that's very common for soldiers. Maybe, but I know, I've actually known many soldiers from war. They fought, and they don't want to talk about it. For them it's a bad memory. They don't want to bring it up, those bad memories up again. So yeah, they just don't want to talk about it. Yeah. It's very interesting. I read several accounts of stories about during World War II, the Americans captured many German soldiers. And so, of course, they have to put them somewhere, right? So they would literally put them on ships and they would send them to America. And then they had these camps out in the Midwest, like, near Wisconsin and Minnesota, and they would live on the camps, and then they would work with the farmers, the local farmers. They would put them to work. They'd say, okay, you guys will help these farmers, with their fields. And you're right, many of the German soldiers, they liked it so much that after the war, they immigrated to America, or they stayed there. Or some of them actually ran away and tried to hide in America, to stay in America, because they liked working there. And I think for the Germans, when they came to the Midwest in America and the big farms, I don't know, maybe it felt like home, because it's, so anyhow, yeah, I think why did Americans have to put German soldiers in the United States? Because I think there's no room for them in Europe. There's not a good, in Europe you have to, of course it's wartime. The local people they don't have enough food, and so it was more reasonable just to send them to the U.S. where they have lots of space, and they can build a big camp, and they have plenty of food, and they can just take care of them there. I don't think they did that as much with the Japanese soldiers. In fact, well, the big issue with the Japanese soldiers was that most of them did not surrender, right? Germans would surrender, Italians would surrender, but the Japanese often, they have that idea that you don't surrender, right? Yeah, it's shameful. So you kill yourself or you fight until you die. Of course, there were Japanese who were captured during the war, and they were put in camps too by the Americans, but they were much, much less than the Germans. But if the Japanese had a reputation for treating their POWs very, very badly, because I've heard culturally, like you said, the Japanese think if you surrender, you're shameful, right? It's a shame, so we're not going to treat you very well. You deserve to die. So, but I also read another case where the POWs, countries did not treat their POWs, was when the Germans were fighting the Soviet, the Russians, or the Russians were fighting the Germans, that on the eastern side, they treated their POWs really, really badly. In fact, I'm reading a book right now, and they said that the Germans, this is written by a German soldier, he said, we just didn't have any food for the Russian POWs, right? We didn't have enough food for ourselves, so they would just put them in a camp and fence it off, and they would give them a little bit of food, but it was often it was in the wintertime, very cold, and there's no food, and so most of them would just die. They would just starve to death and the Germans were like, and the Russians did the same thing to the Germans and the Japanese. After the war, they took Japanese and German soldiers and they sent them back to the Soviet, Sulian. And many of them never came home. They kept them for up until 1950 or even longer, So anyhow, I do have to say, and I'm not just saying this, I do think the Americans and the British, they treated their POWs well, but many of the other countries did not. So, yeah. Okay, so it says here, after learning of Kin Kaseki in 1996, Hearst spearheaded efforts to locate other camps in Taiwan, build memorials for the veterans, and raise public awareness about their bravery and suffering. Okay, suffering, of course, to suffer means what? To go through pain, right? If you get sick, you might suffer from your sickness, or if you injure yourself, or you don't have enough money, or something that's bad, you say we suffered that. And of course, suffering here becomes a 名词, right? You can say right now he is going through a lot of suffering, okay, or he is experiencing suffering. Okay, why don't we say together, to suffer, to suffer, suffering, suffering. Okay, so it says here, after he learned about, Jingua Shi in 1996, Hearst spearheaded efforts. Now, this is a very interesting word. What does to spearhead mean? Well, yeah, you could say pioneer, but I think maybe just you could simply say to lead something. To obviously spearhead. What's a spear? Yeah, is that what it's called? Mao is it? Yeah, and when we say a spearhead, it's the front of the spear, right? So it's a sharp part of the spear. So when you turn this into a 动词, it means to, like somebody said, pioneer or to start, but it usually just means to be the leader, to begin something, to lead it and begin it. Okay. So let's say, for example, you see a problem that nobody is focusing on, or you think that someone should do something about something, and you say, you know what? I'm going to start this. I'm going to take charge of this. Then you can say, you spearheaded that, right? You're the one. What? Yeah, initiate would be a good. But I think, yeah, so initiate, initiate, we could say to lead. Oops, that's an E. To lead, to start. Somebody said to pioneer. To what? Yeah, to kick off. But I think the idea of the spearhead really means like you're starting it and you're leading it. You're in charge, right? Okay. So anyhow, it's a good word. Why don't we say together, to spearhead? to spearhead. Yeah, it's an interesting word because it comes from this word spear, right, in the head of the spear. Yeah. So anyhow, he spearheaded efforts to locate, to find other camps in Taiwan, build memorials for the veterans. And of course, you know what a veteran is, right? Right, a retired soldier. Like Taiwan had, when I grew up in Hualien, there were many homes for veterans from China. These older men who had come over from China, and they were, there from all over. I still remember many of them opened restaurants in Hualien. So when I was growing up, I used to go to these. There were so many Shandong restaurants that had really good,牛肉面and things like that, jiao zi and they had this very strong 口音, right? Whenever we go in there and they would speak, I was like, why do they talk like that? But then I realized that was their Chinese, mainland Chinese accent. I told you once we had a favorite restaurant near my house that we would go to, and it was all these old guys from Shandong province, and it's the only time I can remember where you would pay a tip, 小费, and so of course this was a long time ago. So my father would give them 10块钱 or 20块钱, and they would shout it. They would say 小费20块钱, and everybody could hear it. And every time somebody gave a tip, they would tell the restaurant how much 小费 you gave them, right? So it was really funny. I've never seen that since then, where they tell you, yeah. Yeah. But I think it's also a way to give you some 压力, right? Some pressure, right? Because you think, oh, well, he gave 10块钱, maybe I should give 20块钱, right? And then I feel, I have some 面子, right? So I think that was kind of funny. Maybe we should do that again. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah. So anyhow, yeah. Well, yeah, but the funny thing was that when I visited China for the first time, when I was at university, and I took a trip to China, immediately I realized, wow, this sounds just like people when I was a child in Hualien. The accent was the same, it was very similar. So, oh yeah, it's ridiculous. Don't. This is a subject I really makes me irritated. And many Americans are very irritated by this, it's not that tips are becoming higher. The problem is people are being asked to tip everywhere. I mean, for everything, right? And you don't have to. But, the problem is, normally, if you go to a restaurant where you sit down and the waiter brings your food and they serve you, that's where you should tip, right? But now in America, even if you go to 麦当劳 or Starbucks, right? The problem is everyone uses credit cards, right? And so when you have a screen on your credit card, when you swipe your card, there's a screen. And the screen will ask you, how much would you like to tip? It's 自动的, right? And it gives you options. It'll say no tip, 0, 5%, 10%, 20%, and so on. But it's putting like pressure on you, right? To tip. And of course, a lot of people are like, oh, okay, it's fine, I'll give a tip. But I think many Americans now are like, why? Why should I tip at McDonald's? Or why should I tip at Starbucks? You didn't provide any special service to me, right? So why should I tip? So I think this is where Americans are just tired of being asked to tip all the time, But if you go to a restaurant and you sit down and they serve you, then you really must give a tip. You should absolutely give a tip because that's what we do. And of course, well, I would say it still averages 15 to 20%. That's average. If you want to give more, that's okay. But most of my friends give 15 to 20%. But then there's other things in America that we tip for normally too. It's like if you take a taxi, you should add about 10%. If you get your, 剪头发, if you go to a hairdresser, barber, you should give them about 10% tip, okay? So if the guy at the hotel helps carry your bags to your room, you should give him a couple, $2 or $3 or $3 or $4, give him some cash for his help. So yeah, those things are okay. That's normal. but not when I go to McDonald's, right? Don't ask me to tip then. So, yeah. So anyhow, going back to the story, I just want to note that veteran as a 名词 means a retired soldier, but it can also mean veteran if you use it as a 形容词 or even as a 名词. It can mean anybody who has done something before. For example, if you say, "Oh wow, he's a very experienced teacher," you could say he's a veteran teacher. Okay? So it means someone who has lots of experience. They've done something for a very long time. Or you can say he's a real veteran chef or cook, or someone who's just they've done it for a very, very long time. So we can use this word in a different way as well. It doesn't have to be a soldier who is retired. Yeah. Somebody who's just done something for a very long time. So why don't we say it again? Veteran. Veteran. Okay. So he's built memorials for veterans and raised public awareness. Of course, public awareness just means the public is aware, they know about, okay, awareness. Of course, awareness is something we use this word a lot for many things, like public awareness. We talk about traffic safety or health, right? Or being polite to other people. This is all things the government likes to build public awareness for. Okay, so about their bravery, of course, they were very brave, 很勇敢, and their suffering, of course.
If someone is still in service, like an engineer,
Mhm.
we call him a veteran engineer because he's very
Yeah, I mean, it could be someone who's still working, right? Not the military. If we say the military, it means they're already 退休. But if they're doing something now, they're still doing it, we can use the word veteran as a 形容词 or even as a 名词. You can say, "Oh, has he been working here for a very long time?" And you're like, "Yeah, he's a real veteran." Okay, it means he's really been here a very long time. Yeah, old hand. That's another way of saying it. That's a very casual expression, but we say an old hand. It means a veteran, somebody who's been doing something for a very long time. Okay? Okay, so let's read this together. After learning of Kin Kaseki in 1996, Hearst spearheaded efforts. Okay, let's say it again. Spearheaded efforts to locate other camps in Taiwan. Build memorials for the veterans and raise public awareness about their bravery and suffering. Suffering. Okay. So it says here, starting in 1942, more than 4,300 Allied servicemen captured on battlefields across Southeast Asia were sent to Taiwan in Japanese hell ships. Okay, so of course when you think, if it's a hell ship, that sounds it's a very terrible ship. Yeah. Now I've read a little bit about this, and of course these ships were just normal, cargo ships, right? And they would just pack, the soldiers into the bottom of these ships, and they would send them over. But of course, these voyages sometimes took weeks, right, or many, many days. And of course, it was very hot. There was no, they didn't get too much food or water. And so, of course, many soldiers would die when they were in these ships coming over to Taiwan or wherever they were being sent. Some of them, of course, were sent to Japan because there were Japanese camps in Japan as well for POWs. There's a very famous movie that came out about, 6 or 7 or 8 years ago. It was a Hollywood movie. It's a true story. If you get a chance, I've seen it on HBO in Taiwan before. It's called Unbroken. There's a book. It's based on a book, and it's a really great movie. Basically, it's an American bomber pilot, and he's shot down and captured by the Japanese. And him and his crew, there was a group of men on this airplane. They're sent to, I don't know where they start. I think they start somewhere else, but then they're eventually sent to Japan, to a POW camp, and it's a very brutal POW camp. They're working in a coal mine. You know what coal is? so it's a mine, and they're working in this coal mine, and of course the Japanese really treat them badly, but he survives the war, and the really cool thing is that later on, when he was like 70 or 80 years old, remember when Tokyo had their Aoyun, okay? He actually came back to Japan, and he joined their, they're carrying the torch or something. But anyhow, he basically forgave the Japanese people, and he went back to Japan, and he was. It's a very good story. But if you get the chance to watch this movie or read the book, it's a very good.
Japanese ship all those soldiers everywhere. Was it because they were bound by the international law?
I don't think they cared about the international law. I think they just wanted to send them to a camp. Yeah, we need people to work here or do this job. Like Jingua, sure, there was a mine, right? So they just said, we need these. We'll just work these guys in this mine or this place. So yeah, I mean, it's difficult. Where do you put thousands of soldiers? Where do you keep them, or what do you do with them? Yeah. 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 I don't know if, maybe. I don't quite remember that. I know that happened a lot, but I'm not, maybe there was. I don't quite remember what happens in the movie. But yeah, I mean, obviously the Japanese would sometimes, kanto, behead people. Yeah.
In World War II, I know on many occasions, prisoners were just killed once and for all.
You mean all the prisoners were killed? Yeah, I mean, that happened. And I'm trying to think, there's a story I'm reading about. Oh, there's another story. There's another movie, a Hollywood movie that was made that's a true story. What's it called? It's about a group of, 特战 soldiers, special forces, Army, U.S. Army. And they know that the Japanese have POW camps in the Philippines. And they're afraid that, it's towards the end of the war, it's 1945. They're afraid that the Japanese will kill all the prisoners. So they send this special forces team to go to this POW camp to rescue the prisoners. And so they launch a surprise attack on the camp to rescue all of these prisoners. And they succeed. They actually manage to get all the prisoners out of the camp. And of course, there's a lot of fighting, but they're very successful in this. I forget the name of that movie, but it's a good movie. It's a true story also. But they did that because there was reports that the Japanese had killed they had killed all the soldiers in other camps because they thought, we're going to lose the war, so get rid of them, So yeah. So anyhow, that's so here it says they were captured. Of course, it means they surrendered. They were captured on battlefields. Of course, battlefield is where you fight, right? It's an area where there's a battle fought, okay? And across Southeast Asia. So most of these soldiers were from parts of Dongnanya, like the Philippines or Indonesia or other places where the Allies were fighting the Japanese. Okay? So let's read this. Starting in 1942, more than 4,300, let's say it again, 4,300 Allied servicemen captured on battlefields across Southeast Asia were sent to Taiwan in Japanese hell ships. Now, I think you know this. We've talked about it before, but you know what Allied means, right? Yeah, because it's a capital A, so we know that means... in World War II, we talk about the Allies and the Axis, right? Allies versus the Axis. Okay, so Axis would be who? Japan, Germany, Italy, yeah. Who else? Oh, yeah, Romania, yeah, that's a smaller country, but yeah. Okay, so let's go on. Oh, that's a photo caption. So here it says, most of the POWs were British or American, but Australian, Dutch, Canadian, and some New Zealand servicemen were also among them. Let's read the next paragraph together. It says here, by the time the war ended, 430 men had died from malnutrition, disease, overwork, and torture. Okay, so that would be about 10%, right, of 4,300. So this is a word we've never talked about, malnutrition. What does that mean? So you know the word nutrition, right? Okay, so if we say it's good you should have good nutrition in your diet, right? Or you can say this food is very nutritious, right? But if we say malnutrition, it means you're not getting enough nutrition or you lack good nutrition, right? So whenever you see the letters M-A-L, mal, it means something has not been done properly, okay? Yeah, okay, so yeah, there's some good words here. Let me, there's a few here, like malfunction. Malpractice, that's the one I was thinking about. Okay, if you say someone is maladjusted, that's an A. Okay, so malfunction means it's not working properly, right? Let's say you have an iPhone or a phone and suddenly it's something's wrong, it's not working. You can say my iPhone is malfunctioning. It means it's got a 毛病, it's not working. Or my car is malfunctioning, or that machine, anything that doesn't work properly, it's broken. We say it's malfunctioning, okay? But then malpractice, what does this mean? Yeah, so where do we use this word a lot? Doctors, okay? So let's say you go to see a, kan bing, you go to the 医生 and they treat you, but you get worse. Or they don't give you the right medicine, or they kai dao and they do something wrong, right? They can, often doctors get sued, 被告 for malpractice, right? So I know that all doctors, and I think everywhere, in Taiwan included, but especially America, they all have malpractice insurance, 保险, right? Because it's super expensive. So if you do something wrong and, like I know that sometimes people will sue a doctor because they say, oh, my baby, I had a baby and the baby had a problem and so it was your fault. So they sue him for malpractice, okay? So this word gets used the most for doctors. I'm sure you could use it in other places, but I think 99% of the time it's used for doctors, okay? So we say malpractice. And then, of course, if someone is maladjusted, of course, adjusted means you fit in, you're doing well. But let's say you move to a new country and you don't fit in and you don't do well and you don't like it there and you're not used 不习惯 and everything's wrong. Or let's say you're a child and you go to a new school and the school is terrible, you can't fit in, you don't make any friends, you're not happy there. We can say someone is maladjusted. They did not adjust to that new environment, okay? They're not doing well there. Okay, so that you can see here, this word, all they start with M-A-L. So why don't we say together, malnutrition. Malnutrition. Malfunction. Malfunction. Malpractice. Malpractice. Maladjusted. Maladjusted. Okay, so, this word malfunction is usually like a noun. We can say, we have a malfunction, or there is a malfunction. But you can also use it as a 动词. You can say, my phone is malfunctioning, right? Or, malpractice is usually used as a noun, like he was sued for malpractice. Of course, we have 形容词, malpractice insurance. But yeah, but malnutrition, you can say he is suffering from malnutrition, okay? So these words can get used in many different ways. So they died from malnutrition, disease, overwork, they worked too hard, and torture. Everybody knows what torture is, right? It means to cause pain to somebody on purpose. Okay, so why don't we read this together? Okay, most of the POWs were British or American. But Australian, Dutch, Canadian, and some New Zealand servicemen were also among them. By the time the war ended, 430 men had died from malnutrition, disease, overwork, and torture. Okay, remember this T is like that's like earlier we said the word amateur, right? Same thing, this T is a ch sound. So let's say it again, torture. Okay. Okay, it says here, the harsh conditions of Taiwan's camps were long overshadowed by Japan's notorious death railway between Myanmar and Thailand, Hearst said. Okay, so I don't know if you've heard of this, but they made a movie about it. Yeah, very famous movie, The Bridge Over the River Kwai, right? Okay. Yeah, what? Well, I don't know, maybe that's a Chinese, but the movie was called The Bridge Over the River Kwai. Yeah, and so it's a movie made about, 40 years ago, right? More than 50 years ago, okay, yeah. Very famous movie. And today you can go to Thailand, Taiguo, and you can see the bridge. You know, there's a famous bridge that was built by these POWs. I think it still functions. I think it still works, yeah. So they called this okay, let's go back. It says the harsh conditions, okay, this is very harsh conditions of Taiwan's camps were long overshadowed by Japan's notorious death railway. What does this mean if something is overshadowed by something else? Right. So if you do something or something happens, but then something else happens and nobody pays attention to this because they're looking at something else, we say this overshadows this. Okay. So okay, let's say that you're a student and you get 98% on your test, and you're really happy, right? You get 98%, but then your classmate gets 100 分, 100%. You can say, and then everybody says, "Wow, this guy is great. Look at them; they're so amazing." And then your 98% was overshadowed by their 100%, right? So sometimes when we have something happens, but then something else takes all the attention, we say that this is overshadowed by that, or this overshadows that. Okay, you know what a shadow is, right? A shadow is yeah. So it's almost like you're in the shadow of something else. People can't see you because something else is bigger than you. Everybody understands that, right? Okay, so why don't we always use the word by, overshadowed by, okay? Okay, so why don't we say together, overshadowed by. Overshadowed by. Okay, so nobody really, or most people don't really remember or know about these camps because they were overshadowed by Japan's notorious death railway. Okay, notorious, we've talked about. What does this mean? Yeah. I'll say this. When I think of the word notorious, I think of something that's famous in a bad way. But this word does not always mean bad or negative. It seems really weird to me, but often I see this word notorious used for normal things that are not specifically bad. But when I think of the word notorious, I usually think of it negative or bad. Yeah, so you could say mala huoguo is notoriously hot or spicy, right? Now that's not bad, right? It's famous, right? For that, you could say it's just famous. But again, I feel like notorious, to me at least, it feels like it's more like something that's not good, that's 否定的, that's negative, right? So you could say, this place is notoriously expensive, right? Everyone knows it's super expensive, so don't go there. It's too expensive. Or that's notoriously bad, or he's a notorious criminal, right? So this word can get used in different ways. But let's say it together, notorious. Notorious. Okay, so it's another way of saying famous for something or well-known for something, okay? So Japan's notorious death railway between Myanmar, of course Myanmar, during World War II was known as what? What was the name of Myanmar? Burma. Okay. But I think about 30 years ago they changed the name to Myanmar. But it's interesting though, because when you talk about the people from Myanmar, even today people still say Burmese. B-U-R-M-E-S-E, Burmese, okay?
They've got a new name, Kampuchea. Is it you?
No, Kampuchea is Cambodia. Jembusai. Yeah. So, but that's an old name. They use that during the communist era in Cambodia after Vietnam War, after 1975. But then they went back to using Cambodia for but yeah, Burma is Mien Dien, right? Myanmar. Okay, and of course this railway between Myanmar and Thailand. Okay? Siam. So the old name for Taiguo or Thailand is Siam. Yeah. Just like, remember last week we said Cambodia used to be known as the Khmer Kingdom, Empire. Okay. So yeah, they all have these old names. Okay, just like Iran, Iran, we talked about, the old name is Persia, right? Yeah. Aryan. Actually, but the Aryan connection is even stronger for India. India has an Aryan connection. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, most people don't know that. So, but yeah, it's interesting, histories between the. So anyhow, let's read this. The harsh conditions of Taiwan's camps were long overshadowed by, again, overshadowed by Japan's notorious death railway. Let's say it again, notorious death railway. Between Myanmar and Thailand. Hirsch said. It says more than 60,000 Allied POWs worked as slave laborers on the line. This is the railroad, with about 13,000 dying during construction, along with up to 100,000 civilians, mostly forced labor from the region. Okay, so this is the death railway, the railroad between Thailand and Myanmar. So it says 60,000 Allied POWs worked as slave laborers. So you know what a labor is, right? As someone who, of course there's many laborers everywhere, but if you're a slave, that means you have no choice. Okay, with about 13,000 dying during construction. So besides 60,000 Allied POWs, there are also up to 100,000 civilians. And what's a civilian? Well, it means non-military. So if you're not a soldier, you are a civilian, okay? So why don't we say together, civilian. Civilian. Okay? Mostly forced labor from the region, from that area. So when we say forced labor, it means that you are forced to go work there. It's not like you have a choice. The Japanese said, you must go work in this place. Okay, so let's read this. More than 60,000 Allied POWs worked as slave laborers. Laborers on the line, with about 13,000 dying during construction, along with up to 100,000 civilians, mostly forced labor from the region. Okay, and here's that movie. It says their experiences were later captured in the 1950s, so it was 70 years ago. Yeah, 1950s war movie. The Bridge on the River Kwai. Okay, so this is the name of the movie. I'm trying to remember the name of the actor. He's very famous. Alec Bevan, yeah, but also wasn't Alec Guinness? Alec Guinness, British actor, very famous. I mean, they were in this movie, but yeah. Yeah, I think he was the colonel. Yeah, he was the officer, the British officer. So yeah, so it says their experiences were later captured. Now this is interesting because we talked about POWs, of course, they were captured, right? But here we're not talking about POWs, we're saying their experiences were captured. What does that mean? Portrayed. So when you take a picture, like many of you probably like to take pictures with your camera or your phone, you are capturing an image, right? Or capturing a scene, right? Let's say something is happening. Let's say there's a 表演, right? And you want to capture that. It means you take a picture or you video it and you capture that on your camera or in the picture. So we can use this word capture for that idea, right? To preserve or to shoot a picture or to keep it. Because when you take that picture, you preserve it, right? It's yours. You can look at it over and over again, okay? So this is a good word to know, captured, okay? Yeah. Okay, so let's read this. Their experiences were later captured in the 1950s war movie, The Bridge on the River Kwai. Okay. You know, I think I'm correct in this. I heard that the real name of that river in Thailand is not Kwai. I think it has a different name. But the movie was so popular that they changed the name of the river. Because so many people changed the name of this bridge and this river. I think that's what I read. Okay. So anyhow, here, let's go on. It says here, however, as stories of Kinkaseki slowly emerged, it became known as one of the worst POW camps in all of Asia, Hearst said. Let's read the second paragraph. It says, Canadian filmmaker Ann Wheeler's physician father was among more than 1,100 prisoners of war held in Kinkaseki. Okay, so let's read this. Okay, so when it says here, slowly emerge, we've talked about the word emerge. What does emerge mean? To come out, right? To become known, right? If you can say news of his new job has emerged, right? Something has come out, it's been revealed, it's been made known. Okay, so let's read this. However, as stories of Kinkaseki slowly emerged, it became known as one of the worst POW camps in all of Asia, Hearst said. Canadian filmmaker Ann Wheeler's physician father was among the more than 1,100 prisoners of war held in Kinkaseki. Okay, physician is another word for what? Doctor, right? So her father was a doctor, basically what that means. Okay, so it says here, of course she's a filmmaker, so she makes movies. It says here, Wheeler said that her 3 older brothers grew up knowing nothing about their father's ordeal in the camp where the men were forced to toil in a copper mine. Now what is copper? Tong, yeah. Today it's very valuable. If you have copper, it's worth a lot of money. So yeah, you know, it's funny, American pennies, you know, even 1 cent, they used to be made of copper, but they're not made of copper anymore because copper is too valuable. Yeah, but they used to be copper, yeah. So anyhow, why don't we say together, copper. Copper. Okay, so she said her three older brothers, her gugu, they grew up knowing nothing about their father's ordeal. Now, what is an ordeal? Yeah, something that you go through that's difficult or terrible, okay? So let's say you're sick and you have to go to the hospital for 2 weeks, and you can say, wow, my time in the hospital was a real ordeal. Or you can say, maybe you're in a job and you hate the job, right? You can say, working at that company was a real ordeal for me, right? I hated it. I didn't like it, okay? So something that's not easy, okay? Why don't we say together, ordeal? Ordeal. So their father's ordeal in the camp, where the men were forced to toil. What's another word for toil? Work, yeah. But when we say toil, sometimes it has the idea of working very hard, right? If you say, wow, he toiled at that job for many years, it means he worked, and it just, it's kind of like this, it's a real burden, okay? Mm-hmm. Well, coolie is a noun. It's not a verb in English. So it's an old word, and we don't use it anymore, but a coolie, it's a cheap labor, but this word was used, in China, for the Chinese laborers. The Westerners called them coolies, because they would carry stuff, or they would, yeah. Anyhow, I still remember, even up until about 40 years ago, or 30 years ago, maybe 40 years ago, it was amazing that, in some parts I remember in China, near the Changjiang River, they would still use these guys to pull the boats against the river, pull them upstream. And that would be a good example of a coolie, right? Yeah. So anyhow, let's read this. Wheeler said, she and her three older brothers, grew up knowing nothing about their father's ordeal in the camp, where the men were forced to toil in a copper mine. Let's say it again. Toil in a copper mine. Okay. Let's just read. We'll read one more paragraph and then we'll try a second story. It says, after her father's death in 1963, Wheeler discovered his diaries recording his experience as a doctor during the war, including Taiwan, and turned them into a documentary. Now, documentary is a 纪录片, right? We can say documentary, or we can say documentary film, documentary movie. It's the same thing. Why don't we say together, documentary? Documentary. Because, the word, I know document can be any sort of paper, right? But as a 动词, to document means like to record, like 记录, right? To record something. So documentary movie is like a record of something. It's a history of something. Okay. And of course, you know what a diary is, right? Yeah. Yeah. Maybe some of you keep diaries, or maybe when you were a kid or younger, you kept a diary. So yeah. So anyhow. Yeah. What? A journal. Yeah, a journal is a kind of diary. It can be. I will say something. I think I told you my birth mother, she passed away when I was 14, right? And my father remarried. Maybe you know that, maybe you don't. But anyhow, when I was back in Pennsylvania this time, my stepmother said, hey, I have something for you. And I was like, what's that? She said, I discovered your mother's diary. So it was only for a short period of time, not her whole life. But I haven't read it yet, but I'm very curious to see what's in that diary. So yeah. I kind of glanced at it, and it looked kind of interesting, but yeah. I do. I brought it back to Taiwan with me, so yeah. So why don't we say together, diary? Diary. Now, I want to just point out something. There's a word that looks a lot like diary, and people get it mixed up all the time. Dairy, yeah. What's a dairy? Yeah, dairy is related to milk, 牛奶, right? So if we say butter or ice cream or cheese is a dairy product, right? Or you know, in Taiwan and America, sometimes we have a dairy farm, right, where they have cows and they have milk, right? They get milk. So it's funny, it's just, this is IA and that word is AI, right? So why don't we say it together? Dairy. Dairy. And then this word, diary. Diary. Right, very similar. Okay, so let's read this. After her father's death, in 1963, Wheeler discovered his diaries, recording his experience as a doctor during the war, including Taiwan, and turned them into a documentary. Right, okay. Maybe you can go watch, if you want to find out more about this, maybe you can find this documentary. But I will say that I know that this guy, the Canadian guy, Michael Hurst, he helped create, he raised money and effort to build this monument in Taipei to these POWs. So I think that if you're interested in this, I think that there's a lot more things you can read about now and find out about that are related to this. Okay? So this is a very, very important part of, you know, Taiwan's war history. Okay. You can say that, yeah. You mean for the POW camps? Oh, really? Okay. But I think the guards were soldiers, Japanese soldiers. So warden is somebody who is in charge of a prison, okay? Even here in Taichung, I know there's a prison out on Dadushan over there, right? Near the Gaotiezhan. Isn't there a prison? And of course, for that prison, you will have a warden. A warden is the guy or man or woman who is in charge of the prison. That's their, what do they call that in Chinese? But the person in charge. 监狱长. Okay, yeah, or something like that. Yeah. So why don't we say together, warden? Warden. Okay. So yeah. Okay, so that's I know we have a little bit of time left. Let's try let's do a different story. We usually try to look at two stories. Yeah. Any questions about this? Of, you mean of the you know, actually that's a very good question. I think that in many cases, not all cases, but in many cases, there was a war crimes trial for some of the wardens or people who were in charge of these prisons. So does everybody know what a war crime is? Okay, you know what a crime is, right? So yeah, 战争罪, yeah. So we call that a war crime. So in some cases, the people who were responsible for this, they were charged with war crimes. And some of them went to jail, and a few of them were executed because of what they did during the war. But, you know, it seems like justice was a bit uneven, right? Some people were taken to trial and put in prison or executed, and some people, it seemed like they didn't really face any consequences for their actions. So I don't know, it was a difficult time. I know in Germany, many German or Nazi leaders and soldier officers were tried for war crimes after the war. So yeah. Anyhow, maybe, but I think, you know, I think the Allied powers learned something from World War I. okay? Because after World War I, the Allied powers, they went after Germany, and they said, you owe us all this money, tons of money. And of course, Germany was not able to pay back that money. So the German economy collapsed. They were not able to pay this money, and of course they kept paying this money for many, many, many years afterwards. And the whole situation, some people say, I mean, I'm sure there's different opinions, but some people say that situation helped lead to the rise of the Nazi Party. So I think after World War II, the U.S. and other Allied countries, they said, first of all, of course, we have to change the system in Japan and Germany. So we don't have Nazis, we don't have this come back. But we will actually help those countries rebuild, right? We will give them money. Instead of asking them for money, we will help them rebuild their countries. So there's a Marshall Plan. The U.S. had this plan called the Marshall Plan that gave Japan and Germany lots of money to stand up again, to rebuild. So I think that, of course you see Japan and Germany today, they're very successful, prosperous countries. So I think that's a better way to do things. And just saying, instead of saying, we're going to punish you, you're going to pay us back, you're never going to forget this, they're going to say, okay, we'll help you. But, of course, we want to change your system so that there's no more Hitler, no more things like that. Yeah, I mean, it still works. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard that before. But I think that, of course, war is always bad on a certain level. But I do think that there's times when war is necessary, right? Like World War II. It's funny, for Americans, their nickname for World War II is they call it the Good War. Because they feel like that was a war that was just, right? Some wars are very controversial, like the Vietnam War is very controversial in America. Some people say, yeah, we should, and some people say, no, we should never have fought there. But most Americans, when they look at World War II, they're like, yeah, that was a just war. That was a war that was fought for good reason. We had to fight that war. So yeah, I think, war, of course, it's bad, period. But sometimes war is necessary to defend yourself, right? Of course, if someone attacks you, you can't just say, oh, I don't want to fight a war, so swallow, But anyhow, war is bad, period. Okay, so here it says, this is a very different topic. It says, flexible workplace, key to raising birth rate, minister. Measures. The ministry aims to reduce the burden of child care on women by subsidizing care facilities, public housing, and encouraging male participation. So it's funny, when I introduce Taiwan to many Waigoren, I always talk about the good things of Taiwan, but I also talk about the challenges of Taiwan. And of course, for Taiwan today, one of the biggest challenges is the birth rate. Yeah, everybody talks about that, right? So you know what a birth rate is, right? Right. Taiwan has one of the lowest birth rates in the world, right? So it says, China, Japan, Korea, South Korea. So flexible workplace, okay, what does flexible mean? 弹性, right? So flexible workplace is the key to raising the birth rate. So here it says the ministry aims to, their goal is to reduce the burden. What's a burden? It's something you carry, right? If you have to carry something that's very heavy, you say that's a burden. Now, of course, raising a family can be a burden. Doing your job can be a burden. There's many burdens that we have. So why don't we say together, burden. Burden. So the ministry aims to reduce the burden of child care on women. So women have this burden by subsidizing care facilities. What's a subsidy or subsidizing? Yeah, what is in Chinese? It's 补助, right? Okay. So if we say 名词 is S-I-D-Y, a subsidy, right? Sometimes you get a subsidy from the government. But as a 动词, we can say to subsidize with a Z-E, subsidize, okay? You can say we are going to subsidize that, okay? So let's say the 名词 first, subsidy. Subsidy. And then as a 动词, subsidize. Subsidize. Okay, so a care facility would be, of course, a place to care for children, right? Okay. Public housing, of course, that's what, 公共, public housing. And encouraging, of course, male participation, men to help out, to raise children, right? Okay, that's important too. Okay, so let's look at this. It says, fostering flexible workplace environments and encouraging men to participate in childcare are key to boosting birth rates, as it is mostly women who face challenges in balancing careers and family planning, Deputy Minister of Health and Welfare Lin Qingyi said yesterday. Okay, so what does this word to foster means? What is? Yeah, foster means to grow something, to raise something, if you say, I'm going to foster happiness in this family or this group, it means I'm going to grow or increase or encourage. I guess encourage might be a good word too, to encourage or grow something. So yeah, it's a good word. Sometimes we use it to say to foster a feeling or a environment, or to encourage or grow something. So why don't we say together, foster. Foster. Okay, flexible workplace environments, 环境, and encouraging men to participate, to join childcare are key to boosting. Boosting means to raise, right? To grow, to increase birth rates, as it is mostly women who face challenges in balancing. Now, you know what balance is, right? When you walk down if you're walking, you're always balancing yourself. Otherwise, you'll fall over, right? I'm sure you remember when you were maybe a child learning how to balance a bicycle, right? For the first time, you learn how to ride it. But here we're balancing what? Career, your job, and family planning, right? How do you balance those things, okay? So let's read this. Fostering flexible workplace. Let's say it again. Fostering flexible workplace environments and encouraging men to participate in childcare are key to boosting birth rates, as it is mostly women who face challenges in balancing careers and family planning. Deputy Minister of Health, and Welfare, Lin Qingyi said yesterday. Okay. Now, sometimes we can say balancing this with this. We can say and this, but we can say with this too. We can say balancing this and with this. So we can use those words that way. So it says here, Minister of Health and Welfare, Qiu Taiyuan, on Saturday last week outlined 4 strategies to address the nation's declining birth rate. Okay, now it says here, he outlined. What does that mean, to outline something? It means to provide details, right? Now, when you were in school, I don't know about you, but I know I did, sometimes before you write a report, you have to write an outline, right? You can say, okay, A, B, C, D, and then under that you have maybe 1, 2, 3. It's an outline. It's not the real report, but it's basically the details, or the kind of like the plan, right, of something. So if you outline something, it means you give out details. You show the plan of something, okay? So why don't we say together, outlined. Outlined. Okay, 4 strategies, okay, 4 ways to address the nation's declining birth rate. So to address means to deal with something, right? Now, of course, address, when you think of this word, you usually think like 地址, right? What's your address? But here it's a 动词, to address a problem, to address a situation. It means to deal with it. What do we do about it, okay? To address. Now, of course, when we say your mailing address, we say your mailing address. But here it's address, okay? The accent is to, on the second address is the 地址, right? And then to address is this word, to, as a 动词. Okay? The nation's declining means dropping, falling birth rate. Okay. I read the other day that Taiwan's population has declined for I think it's the 19th consecutive month. The 19th month in a row, the population has dropped. So, yeah. Okay, so let's read this. Minister of Health and Welfare, Chiu Taiyuan, on Saturday last week, outlined 4 strategies to address the nation's declining birth rate. Okay, and then these are the details. He says they were I'll read it first. They were reducing the burden of child care, improving mother-child health, funding more child care facilities and public housing for new parents, and increasing people's willingness to get married and have children, Chiu said. Okay, so these are the ways they want to encourage us. So, I think I don't know. I think maybe this will help, but I don't think it will solve the problem. Because, in my opinion, I think declining birth rate is, it's already, I call it a cultural change. Yeah, honestly, because I think the young people, their cultural values or their ideas have changed, right? So you can give them money, you can give them child care facilities, you can give them all subsidies, but I think many of them just still say, I'm not interested, right? I don't want to have kids. I don't want to get married, I mean, of course, I think these things will help, but I don't think it will completely change the situation. So let's read this. They were reducing the burden of child care, improving mother-child health, funding more child care facilities, and public housing for new parents, and increasing people's willingness to get married. Let's say it again. Willingness to get married and have children, Chiu said. Okay, now of course, willingness is a noun, right? You can say, what is your willingness to help out? Do you have a lot of willingness to do this? It means, are you willing to do this? Okay, do you want to? Okay. Of course, funding means providing money for these things, for these types of 设备 or facilities.
What about the birth rate in the United States, especially that assuming the 5G?
Sorry, what again?
The birth rate in the United States, is it going down or?
I think a birth rate is slowly falling in America, not as fast as Taiwan or Asia. But I think the big difference with America, and this is something Taiwan needs to think about, is America is an immigrant country, right? So even if the birth rate is falling among local people, there's always lots of people immigrating to America. So, what? Well, from all over. No, I'm talking about legal immigration, not illegal immigration. So people are legally coming into America from Asia, right? Or Europe or Hispanic, Latin America. They're immigrating into America. So America is always getting new people coming in, becoming Americans, basically. So I think that helps balance a falling birth rate. But the problem, I think, or the challenge with many Asian countries is immigration is very, very low compared to other countries. So, the question is, does Japan or Taiwan or South Korea, do they welcome immigrants, people moving here from other countries that want to stay here and become Taiwanese, And I told you before, this is a big challenge for many foreigners, is they want to get a Taiwanese passport, but the Taiwan government says you need to give up your other passport before you get a Taiwan passport. And many people don't think that's fair. Because I know if you're Taiwanese and you want to go to America and get a U.S. passport, you do not have to give up your Taiwan passport. You can keep your Taiwan passport. So, yeah. Okay, so anyhow, let's read one or two more. Yes?
In Taiwan, part of the divorce rate
Very high, yeah. Mm-hmm. You mean it's expensive? Right. But we have that problem in America too. I mean, a lot of, anyhow, yeah, I mean, those are all real challenges, I know. So, okay. So we'll just read one more paragraph and then we'll be done. It says, Chiu said encouraging matchmaking activities could help with the last strategy, which drew public criticism. What is a matchmaking activity? Yeah, so it's funny because I guess some people were not happy with this. Yeah, well, that's what we call blind date, going on a blind date. But yeah, matchmaking activity would be where you have you bring a group of men and women together and you say, okay, get to know each other, right? But in traditional Taiwan and in traditional China, there was a person that is known as a matchmaker, right? And what do? They go to one family and they say, okay, your son wants to get married. I will help you find a good wife, right? And then they introduce the two families, and we call that person a matchmaker, okay? It's like a job, So yeah. So why don't we say together, matchmaker. Matchmaker. Matchmaking. Now, sometimes, even today, you might be called a matchmaker, right? Like if you introduce your friend to another person, you say, oh, I think he should meet her, right? She seems like a nice woman, and you introduce them. People might say, oh, you're a matchmaker. So it's not like you're just trying to bring two people together, right? Help them meet each other. So this word gets used a lot today. So here he thinks that maybe we can have more of these activities to encourage people. Okay, so let's read this. Chiu said, encouraging matchmaking activities. One more time, matchmaking activities could help with the last strategy, which drew public criticism. Criticism. Right, which is, peeping. But, sometimes when you say something or do something, you say it draws or drew. It doesn't mean to draw, but it means to attract public criticism. So you can say it drew public criticism. It means to attract something, yeah. Okay, any questions? Okay, good. So I think we're meeting again next Thursday too, right? Okay, good. Well, have a good week, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.